Good morning, everybody. It's my pleasure to welcome you today to this high-level event. You will see we have a great speakers to speak about the just transition, what we need, the solutions we need. We will start just in 2 minutes because we have a lot of people connecting. We expect nearly 200 people to connect. So just in 2 minutes, we are back with official start. Hello, I'm back. We have now spent the 2 official late minutes to start officially. So thank you all for connecting today to this webinar about investing in geothermal energy as a key solution for just transition. Just want to remind you that it's part of a project supported by the European Commission called GEOENVI, and we have started already this month with a series of technical webinars before this high-level discussion. We discuss licensing and processing, air quality, seismicity, social engagement, water quality, and we will conclude mid-April with LCA and sustainable finance. Today, we can see that we have a really great agenda of high-level speakers. I will start to give the floor to Mr. Anne Van Steen, which is the acting director for Just Transition Directorate, a new created directorate in the European Commission in DG Energy. We will after have a pleasure to have Mrs. Terhi Lehtonen, State Secretary of the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change from Finland. We will after go to 2 technical presentations of case studies. It's always good to see what happened on the ground, and we'll have Guillaume Ravier from ES Geothermal, so part of EDF group in France, and after we have Mr. Tamas Megzej from the Szeged municipality. This will give some input for roundtable discussion with 4 of our high-level speakers: Martin Ojic, member of European Parliament from Slovakia. We have Mrs. Cathy Tritwell from WWF, so the view of an environmental NGO, Mr. Olivier Racle from ENGIE, and with that, we will discuss some key solutions for the just energy transition. I will not be long in my introduction, just saying that indeed, we discussed today a lot of investment, notably in research, for the hard to abate sectors in terms of emissions, but we need also to discuss how we can deploy available technology which are affordable, clean, local, so useful for just transition. Notably, how to tackle the situation of energy poverty. We see in some countries is dramatic. We have learned in the project GEOENVI that in Hungary, in some rural areas, people have nothing to burn for eating except plastics or some waste. So the situation of energy poverty is also a key aspect in just transition. We need also to see how we go beyond just coal region transition, but in the future, oil and gas region in transition. So all this discussion is what we have today. So I'm now giving the floor to Mr. Anne Van Steen to deliver his speech about a green transition based on solidarity, the view of the European Commission. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Philippe, and good morning to all of you. I hope you can hear me and see me well. I'm really very happy to join you for this important event here today, very timely, and I think a topic of really great importance. The title of that you've asked me to speak on is Green Transition Based on Solidarity, and that is, I think, really a very good way of explaining what it is that we are trying to do implementing the European Green Deal. You're all, I'm sure, familiar with the European Green Deal. That is now very much sort of the Bible for everything that we're doing in terms of energy policy in the EU. And this Green Deal, of course, came out at a time which was completely different from the world that we're living in today. It came out before the pandemic. No one had any idea what was going to hit us. And for some people, it might have been sort of tempting to say, okay, now we need to put the Green Deal a little bit behind us, all this talk about climate neutrality. Now we have other priorities to deal with. But in reality, I think it's exactly the opposite. The Green Deal is as relevant as ever, because it's not just about climate neutrality, it is about growth, getting Europe back on track in terms of economic development. And the Green Deal, I think, really contains all the answers that we need in order to do that. The Green Deal is also very much based on the concept of just transition. I mean, we've said very clearly from the Commission that if you do not have a fair, just transition, which leaves nobody behind, there is not going to be an energy transition. We're not going to meet our objectives in terms of climate, in terms of reforming our energy sector, our energy systems, unless we make sure that this is done in a fair and just way where everybody, and we really mean everybody, can see the benefits of this. And this, of course, creates certain challenges in certain parts of Europe, which perhaps are in a less advantageous position in terms of their starting point for this just transition and energy transition more generally. And that is really important to be aware of, that we are not all the same in Europe. There are regions in Europe that are highly dependent on fossil fuels still, both in terms of generation, but also in terms of extraction. And for these regions, we need to have special considerations. And that is why we also think that today discussing renewable energy, such as geothermal, is really important, because geothermal can offer opportunities, especially for such regions, as we move forward, because there are many similarities between, shall we say, the activities that we now need to leave behind in terms of exploitation and extraction of fossil fuels, and the new opportunities that can be brought to us by renewables, especially geothermal, which also involves understanding of the whole system about drilling, the system about extraction, and things like that, which are very often expertise that is available. But of course, it needs to be done in a way whereby these people can be retrained, and we can create new activities, because that is really the issue here. We do not want to create energy poverty. We have already serious problems with energy poverty in Europe. We can see that some 30 million people today in Europe claim that they're unable to heat their homes appropriately during winter. We do not want to create additional social issues related to the energy transition, and that's why we need to take special care for these regions that are facing more challenges than generally in the EU. For that, we have created the Just Transition mechanism, which has both technical assistance and funding instruments, especially the Just Transition Fund, which is of 17.5 billion, which of course hopefully can generate even more, because these 17 billion are grants. Of course, once you look at that as a catalyst, you will have much more investment going as a function of that. Perhaps even more importantly, we now have the recovery package, which has been endorsed by the member states in July of last year. And basically there we see also huge opportunities for spending the money that we need to invest in terms of getting the economy back on track after the pandemic, or once the pandemic is over, because in a way we are still in it, as we all know. And of course, that we believe that at least 1/3 of that should be invested in issues that are directly related to climate. And of course, their renewable energy and geothermal, again, is one really, really very important part. You also know that in terms of implementing the Green Deal, the Commission in the autumn came out with the so-called Climate Target Plan, which very clearly said that if we want to be credible with climate neutrality by the middle of this century, we also need to increase our ambition already in the short to middle term, the medium term, the 2030 term. It's not enough, as we had so far pledged to reach 40% greenhouse gas emission reductions by 2030. We need to go at least to 55% greenhouse gas emission reductions. And of course, this has very important implications for the energy sector, because 75% of all emissions are directly related to the energy sector. So that's why we are right now very busy in the Commission, not just in DG Energy, but also in other parts of the Commission, to prepare what we call the Fit for 55 package. And of course, these 55 refers to the 55% greenhouse gas emission reductions. And that package should come out in June. This is at least what the plan is. And it will be a very big package, because it will contain legislation specifically on ETS, effort sharing, LULUCF, land use, emissions, and forestry. It will also look at CO2 and cars, various types of proposals specifically addressing transport, for example, aviation and maritime transport. And then for us in DG Energy, it will entail a revision of the Renewable Energy Directive and the Energy Efficiency Directive. And that is needed because those two directives are currently geared towards the less ambitious target of 40% greenhouse gases. And we know for 55% greenhouse gas emission reductions, we need to have more renewable energy. We need to be better in terms of using our energy efficiently. So we need also to have higher targets for both renewables and energy efficiency for that. And we're currently looking at what those targets should be. And we're of course also looking at, if we increase those targets, how are we going to meet them? Because it's not just enough to write a new number into the directive. We also need to make sure that we know what is actually required in terms of the measures that we need in order to get us there. So all of that is being worked out right now. We're in constant talks with our colleagues in DG Klima that is involved in a lot of these things. And we will move forward with a package that is fully coherent and consistent across all these different proposals. And of course, that will land on the table of the European Parliament and the Council in June, hopefully. And then we will see what the co-legislators will say in terms of bringing this into action. For the renewables, and of course we're talking here at geothermal today, so the renewables, we have a particular eye on heating and cooling, because we think that is currently being underused, the potential for renewables in that sector. For electricity, we're doing better. We can still do more, but we're doing better than in heating and cooling, and transport is also lagging behind to some extent. But heating and cooling is a particular area that we are focusing on, and of course there again geothermal has a lot of potential to contribute to that. We need to make sure that all these investments that I started by talking about are directed into the right kind of technology so that we avoid a carbon lock-in. I mean, we have to be aware that the investments in the energy sector, once you've made them, there's a tendency for these investments to last for a long, long time. They have long payback periods. And therefore, it's really important that these assets are the right assets that are fit for carbon neutrality. And that, of course, in reality means a carbon-free energy sector by the middle of the century. Geothermal has the possibility of producing electricity, heating, cooling, and it also offers some storage possibilities later on. And all of these things are very closely linked. We've said that from the Commission side with our energy system integration strategy that we brought out last year as well. We very strongly believe that we need to look at things much more holistically. We need to look at things in connection with each other, not just between the different parts of the energy sector, but also between the energy sector and industry, the energy sector and agriculture, transport. All of these things need to be looked at to exploit the synergies that we will need in order to reach carbon neutrality at the lowest possible costs. We know that geothermal has a good potential. We have actually also data that shows that there are lots of jobs involved with geothermal, which is something that we really need now because, of course, again, the pandemic has thrown a lot of people into unemployment. We have supported quite a lot of projects under the Horizon 2020. We will continue to support geothermal with Horizon Europe once it starts, and that is actually starting right now. So in many ways, Europe is in a good place. We're in a good place compared to the rest of the world, but we still have a huge unused potential for geothermal, and from the Commission side, we would really like to see that brought to good use, because that will be really important in terms of providing renewable energy that is also different from many of the other renewable energies that we're going to see much more of in the future, especially wind and solar, because they are, of course, characterized by variability. They do not, shall we say, produce a constant output, but with geothermal, you have something that can be much more akin to base load, and that's another really important feature of geothermal that one should remember. I think I've probably used my time, but really just to come back again to the concept of the just transition. Again, for us, really, really important to make sure that we move forward, bearing in mind that Europe is different. There is different challenges in different parts of Europe, and we need to look at specific measures and specific solutions for areas that are facing particular challenges. And that's really the concept of the just transition. The just transition also includes the element of avoiding and alleviating energy poverty, which is still an issue. Of course, energy poverty is to some extent in the hands of the member states because these are social issues. But I think also from the energy sector, for example, by promoting more energy efficiency, making sure that people live in houses and apartments that are, not very poor from an energy efficiency point of view, we can do a lot there also to do that. But energy poverty is something that we need to take very seriously in order to have a transition that is benefiting everyone. Let me leave it there, Philippe. Thank you very much to all of you for listening. I will be able to stay with you for at least a little bit longer, and I look forward to hearing the other speakers as well. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for your excellent inputs to the discussion. I just have a short question for you. Indeed, you mentioned the Renewable Energy Directive. You are quite familiar with it because for 15 years ago, it was you in charge of this document. One thing already mentioned for many times is that if we want to have a just transition, we have a funding, but we need probably to streamline the procedures, the licensing procedure. Do you have some ideas how we can better do that?
we are fully aware that there are issues in many places with permitting procedures. Of course, permitting procedures are important because there are, of course, especially environmental considerations, and we need to make sure that whenever we move forward with any project in the energy sector, be it renewable or not, hopefully in the future more and more renewable. But of course, we need to make sure that all the relevant issues have been properly analyzed and that everything is sorted out. So we can not entirely eliminate, but what we can eliminate are sort of purely administrative procedures where, you know, local administrations are simply taking too long, or too many different people are involved, different instances. And the Renewable Energy Directive already includes quite a lot about this. When it was reviewed last time, this was further strengthened. We've been looking at it. We're not sure that it needs amending again, because one thing which, of course, is important to be aware of here is that we are reviewing, for example, and proposing a revision of the Renewable Energy Directive already before the end of the transposition time for it. Member states have until this summer to put this directive into national legislation, and now we're already looking at the next edition. And we think that what we have already is good, because it sort of sets time frames. It gives minimum times for how long one should take for doing permitting procedures. It also looks at the possibility of one-stop shops, so basically to have one instance that is responsible, and we think that is something that is quite useful in that sense. So we think for the moment it's okay, but it's something that we're looking at, and of course it is something where, you know, from time to time we also get people writing to the Commission complaining that things are not, and we're taking that very seriously. We're always looking at it and see whether it is in line with the requirements of the directive.
Okay, thank you very much for answer to this question. I think indeed now it's time maybe to move the discussion and to give the floor to Teemu Lehtonen. So as I mentioned, State Secretary of the new Finnish government from the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change, with a really one of the most ambitious country, we could say, in terms of climate targets. So the floor is yours to explain us what is your strategy. You are muted and we cannot hear you.
I think you.
No, it's okay.
I think this somehow keeps jumping, but I think now we're back on. Thank you, Philip, and thank you, Hans, for the very good intervention and wise words from the Commission. And good morning to everyone, or midday rather, in Helsinki. It is excellent to have the opportunity to share our experiences on becoming climate neutral by 2035. Dear friends, first of all, a few words about the background of our target. Our goal to be climate neutral by 2035 and carbon negative or climate positive soon after was set on the basis of our climate science panel and their assessment of what is consistent with our commitment under the Paris Agreement to pursue limiting warming to 1.5 degrees. Now, Finland, Hans was saying, Europe is different. Finland is a large country with cold climate, sparse population, and long transport distances. And high share of energy intensive industry. Our per capita greenhouse gas emissions are among the highest in the EU. So we believe that if Finland can be climate neutral by 2035, other countries should also be able to follow suit. We have already in Finland many policies that will deliver greenhouse gas emission reductions, for example, a ban on coal by 2029 and targets to halve transport emissions by 2030. While the government, when it started in office in mid-2019, we were not able to outline all the policies necessary for achieving the target from the outset. We are currently working on the strategies and sets of policies and measures that will lead to climate neutrality by 2035 in a manner that is cost effective and socially and regionally fair. The government has set already indicative emission reduction budget to planned reforms like energy tax reform and sectoral policies. And we will take stock this spring of progress made to secure the path to climate neutrality. We are also in the process of updating our domestic climate law to contain the climate neutrality objective, as well as domestic 2030 and 2040 emission reduction targets. Our climate science panel has assessed that the emission reduction target for 2030 should be set at 60%, and this would be economy-wide, not just the effort-sharing targets as was before the case for domestic law. Now, the transition to climate neutral circular economy will require action at all levels, at the EU level, at national level, and at local level. Many municipalities and regions have also set their own climate goals. Over half of Finns live in a municipality aiming to be climate neutral by 2030 or 2035. Our government has also successfully worked together with industries for sectoral carbon neutrality roadmaps. The government invited key sectors of industry to develop low carbon roadmaps, the energy, chemicals, forestry, and technology industries. All of those sectors cooperated and came up with their roadmaps, and many more sectors came up. I think it was something like 12 sectors that joined in, and actually they identified more emission reductions in those roadmaps than what the government had thought would be found. Now, there is an issue that we have to be careful about overlaps, but still, I think it was a very interesting exercise. So the roadmaps map out the emission reduction potential and the necessary enabling conditions to unlock them, as well as the clean technologies potential for a positive carbon handprint across global value chain. They will inform our climate and energy policies, and they also are a way to show the private sector's commitment to climate action. The emission reductions will require the right conditions, most crucially a sufficient carbon price and measures to level the playing field in respect of carbon constraint. This requires in particular tightening and strengthening of the EU emissions trading system. According to our analysis, a big share of the emission reductions we need to achieve in the 2030 perspective and the additional reduction effort for 55%, at least 55%, should come from the sectors under the EU emissions trading system. We are also stepping up considerably our investment into biodiversity protection and nature restoration. We are developing nature-based solutions for climate change mitigation and adaptation. And we're finalizing a new strategic circular economy program with quantitative targets to reduce resource consumption and double our resource productivity and recycled material use. Now, when the COVID pandemic devastated our societies and put our economies also on life support, Finland decided early on to direct financial economic recovery resources to action that also speeds up the necessary climate transition. The government decided to use at least half of the EU Recovery and Resilience Facility funding to direct climate action. A big part of the climate finance available under Finland's draft recovery plan will be available for leveraging clean investments, as well as research and innovation in the energy sector. As said earlier, Finland is a cold country, even if in the Arctic, the average temperature is rising double the global average speed. And while 85% of the electricity consumed in Finland is CO2 free, and wind power on land especially is competitive and continues to expand without feed-in tariffs or other subsidies, we still have significant fossil emissions in the heating sector. As regards the heating sector, majority of the remaining greenhouse gases are related to oil-based heating. Well, this is actually 7% of the total, and fossil fuel combustion in district heating. In Finland, 46% of buildings and households are connected to district heating. 90% of the district heating systems heat is produced by burning. Around 40% from biomass and around 10% waste heat recovery, and rest, approximately 50%, is fossil fuels. We have already started a subsidy for individual households to scrap heating oil systems and replace them with other systems. And this was actually part of our first recovery investments last spring, where we put some significant funding to this. The subsidy sum varies depending on the type of heating system chosen. 4,000 for district heating, geothermal, or air water heat pump system. Other systems, direct electricity or biomass, receive 2,500 euros. This subsidy has been very popular. There is a significant time lapse or lag to process the demand, but we are also upping investment into it because it's very effective. And we also have a subsidy for local authorities because a lot of the building stock is also local government owned. And we have a general energy renovation subsidy where it is, according to our statistics, about 1/3 of the energy renovations are also include removing oil heating in apartment buildings, for example. Now, on this scrapping scheme for oil-based heating in households, the current data is that 65% moved to air water heat pump systems, 21% to geothermal heat pumps, and 10% to district heating. Only 2% have chosen direct electricity, and around 2% biomass, also solar. Now, as regards the district heating system, much of this is based on combined heat and power. We need many different solutions to replace the current fossils and move away from combustion in the district heating sector. The government has also agreed to use resources available to Finland under the Just Transition Fund to replace especially domestic peat in district heating. While there will be some space for bioenergy from forestry sector waste and residue streams, ideally the transition should be directed to alternatives beyond combustion. Capturing the waste heat potential where it exists, geothermal, deep heat, innovative combinations of technologies. The programming for our Just Transition Plan is still in the process, but there's a keen interest in incentivizing innovative solutions that accelerate our economy towards climate neutrality at the same time. Now, geothermal is very promising, as you know in this audience, for its ability to reduce greenhouse gas emissions but also combustion-related small particulate emissions from traditional heat production. We have some interesting pilot projects. For example, one in Espoo next to Helsinki will soon deliver geothermal heat for the district heating system. The 2 geothermal wells extend to a depth of more than 6 kilometers, and really with the support from the Recovery and Resilience Fund, and hopefully also the Just Transition Fund, and and other national ways to leverage this investment. We really hope that we will get very far in decarbonizing also the district heating system. And we will have many deep heat and many different depths of geothermal pilots across Finland in the coming years. And just to conclude, the departing point is our commitment to maintain global warming to less than 1.5 degrees, but accelerating the path to climate neutrality. While it's a climate strategy, it is also an investment strategy. And it's an investment strategy that will improve our societies and increasing well-being of European citizens. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this inspiring statement and a good national strategy indeed to be climate neutral before the objective of 2050 for all Europe. I just have one question, because you mentioned ETS. One question we have for sure in the just transition is that what could be the role of carbon pricing in the heating and cooling sector?
Thank you. Well, for us, the ETS is very important. It will be, first of all, majority of our district heating is under the ETS, and it will be key to provide the right kind of incentives for electrifying also our industrial processes and moving towards hydrogen-based production, for example. It is also the main tool for at least halving our energy use of peat by 2030, which, as said, majority of it is in the district heating sector, but that is also covered by the ETS. So that ETS pricing is very, very important. We have also decided to use and implement a carbon price for peat in case the ETS price is not sufficient to put the peat energy use on a path to halving the energy use by 2030. Now, currently, it looks like already the current carbon price would be driving, and the general atmosphere and the policies and the local and regional authorities' policies to move towards climate neutrality. It looks like this is all affecting the peat use, and we're phasing out perhaps quicker than what was earlier foreseen, but we will have to see. And this for the moment is not driven by a carbon price or tax. So we will have to make sure that that target is met, and we might need to set up, or we're planning to set up a carbon price floor that would kick in case the development wouldn't be sufficient. We have also looked into pricing. We have significant energy taxes on transport fuels, for example, where it's an energy component and a CO2 component. And we are also looking into our specific target for transport, the halving of transport emissions by 2030, that there's the last 1.5 million tons that we need to get. We probably need a pricing instrument, and there is a plan to look into also a potential of an emissions trading system to do that.
Thank you very much indeed. It's a big challenge. We know the just transition and the tools will be sure not the same all over Europe, and there will be many tools and solutions for reaching this climate neutrality, but with a just transition. Thank you, Hans. Thank you, Terry, for your statement as a keynote speech. And now we move to the second session with 2 case studies. And for that, I first give the floor to Guillaume Ravier from ES Geothermal to deliver a presentation with inputs from the GEOENVI project. The floor is yours, Guillaume.
Okay. Did you give me the flow for the presentation also? Okay. Do you see my screen?
Yes, I confirm everything is fine.
Okay. So Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Guillaume Ravier. I'm working for Électricité de Strasbourg Geothermal, and I'm very pleased to present you today deep geothermal energy and benchmark with other renewables. So first, what is deep geothermal energy? Well, in fact, it's not really easy to define this concept of deep geothermal energy, because in some place in the world, we can find very hot water at very shallow depth. So in fact, the depth is not the good parameter to define what is deep geothermal energy. So there is no consensual definition at the moment, and maybe the easiest solution to define deep geothermal energy is the exclusion of what deep geothermal energy is not, and it's mainly geothermal probes or heat pumps and shallow aquifer, and especially for individual heating, like private houses or small buildings. So the geothermal energy is mainly for, we can say, for big facilities for district heating and cooling generation, but also for power generation, and we will see later raw material co-production, and it was in fact the first use in the Lardarello area in Italy. So as Mr. Hans van Steen, acting director for Just Transition at GEOENVI, said the main potential in continental Europe of deep geothermal energy is the heat generation. So that's why my presentation will be focused mainly on heat generation, and I will focus my presentation on France because I know quite well the French market. So just a short presentation of results of the recent studies from the ADEME, the French agency for the ecological transition, about different costs of heat generation in France. And it appeared that the geothermal district heating and cooling is the cheapest one in France, between 15 and 55 euros per megawatt-hour of heat. And it is cheaper than gas, biomass, biogas, or fuels. And this study was performed using 71 deep geothermal installations in France. 49 are located in the Paris Basin here, and 21 in the Aquitaine Basin in the southwest of France. So in 2018, the heat production from these geothermal installations reached about 1.8 terawatt-hour of heat, and a total heat capacity of 627 megawatts. But maybe we can ask how far the geothermal energy sector can provide a path to achieving the European Commission's 55 emission reduction targeted by 2030. And to answer to this question, we really need to perform some environmental impact assessment, and LCA is a very good methodology to achieve this. And for this, I will present you a case study of the GEOENVI H2020 project, which is the Rittershofen geothermal plant. So this geothermal plant is located in the French Upper Rhine Graben, close to Germany here in Alsace, and this geothermal plant is providing heat to a Rocket Frère starch plant located at Bannheim, just close to the Rhine River, which is here on the picture. So this starch plant is transforming every day 2,000 of corn and wheat, and the total heat demand of the starch plant is about 80 megawatt of heat. And currently, this thermal demand is provided by 50% by biomass, 25% by geothermal energy, 20% by natural gas, and about 5% from biogas. And the Rittershofen geothermal plant is owned by 3 shareholders, Électricité de Strasbourg, Rocket Frère, which is also the heat user, and the Caisse des dépôts et de consignation, which is part of the French state. So what is this Rittershofen heat plant? The reservoir depth is about 2.5 kilometers and is a fractured sandstone and carboniferous granite. The brine is a sodium, calcium chlorine, potassium chlorine dominated brine with a total dissolved solid of 100 grams per liter with 0.2% of non-condensable gases dissolved in the brine. There is currently 2 drilling in operation, 1 production well, GRT2, drilled in 2014, and 1 injection well, GRT1, drilled in 2012. And this project is classified as Enhanced Geothermal System project because it was necessary to enhance the connection of the injection well to the reservoir with chemical stimulation. So the plant is in operation since May 2016, and it is designed with a pressurized geothermal loop over 25 bar. So there is absolutely no non-condensable gas emission during operation, and we can reach this with a downhole production pump which control the pressure on surface. The maximal heat capacity of the plant is about 27.5 thermal megawatts, and the total electrical consumption of the plant reached 550 kilowatts. And there is between the geothermal plant and the starch plant a 15 kilometers long transport loop to transport the heat from the geothermal plant to the heat user. And the availability of the plant is almost 95%, and it supplies every year about 180 gigawatt of heat. So how we can assess the environmental assessment? Well, the life cycle assessment is a very good methodology, but in the framework of the GEOENVI H2020 project, some guidelines were proposed because it's not so evident to apply the LCA methodology to geothermal energy. So by applying these guidelines, we could assess the environmental assessment of the Rittershofen geothermal plant, which was one of the case study of the GEOENVI project. So the functional unit is 1 kilowatt of heat delivered to the district heating. The boundary of the system include the geothermal plant, but also all the production and the process of raw materials or energy required for the whole life cycle of the geothermal plant. And we use also the GEOENVI database for this life cycle assessment studies, and we compare the deep geothermal energy to natural gas and biomass using the models already existing in GEOENVI database. So as a result, to perform this life cycle assessment, first we need to do the life cycle inventory. And for geothermal, it includes the exploration, drilling preparation, drilling, well stimulation, well testing, plant construction, plant operation and maintenance, and of course end of life, which is mainly well abandonment. So as a result, this life cycle assessment analysis gives some result about greenhouse gases emission. So the total emission of CO2 equivalent of 1 kilowatt of heat generated by the geothermal plant is about 5.9 grams of CO2, which is about 3 times less than biomass and 40 times less than natural gas. We can see here in the graph. So by preventing some gas burning, the geothermal plant is saving every year about 44,000 tons of CO2 every year. And the rest of impact, like ecotoxicity or the rest, are quite similar or lower to the ones of biomass or natural gas. And one is very surprising also, it's the land use, because in fact, if geothermal energy or natural gas are quite similar, they are very, very lower than the biomass. And this is about 640 times less than biomass. And this parameter could be very important, especially in terms of competition of land use. And for this, geothermal energy is more competitive than biomass. So yes, geothermal sector can provide a path to achieving the European Commission's 55th emissions reduction targeted by 2030, and really needs some financial support and public support also. And I would like also to present you some example of raw material recovery. And in the Upper Graben, the geothermal brine is containing about 200 milligrams of lithium. And this mineral is very strategic for the electrical mobility and the energy storage. And at Rittershofen, from last December to February, we have the chance to test the first on-site lithium extraction under the Ugeli project. And this mini pilot here is one of the 6 nominated for the Rogeroni Bertani award. And the potential of the Rittershofen geothermal plant is about 3,000 tons per year of Li carbonate. And if we import this Li carbonate from South American salars, it would represent about 1,100 tons of CO2 saved from shipping. And there is some ongoing studies that estimate that the geothermal heat can provide, well, 50% of the geothermal heat could provide about all the heat and power required for LE extraction and processing for the geothermal plants. So this is also a good challenge for deep geothermal energy, and which can target nearly zero carbon emission lithium production in Europe. And these minerals, again, is very important for the electrical mobility and energy storage. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Guillaume. Indeed, excellent presentation, because it's always good to look at case studies and what happened on the ground. And what is interesting is that your presentation gives a lot of input also to debate all over Europe about sustainable battery, but also sustainable finance. When you make this comparison with gas, and some people are trying to see how gas could be included in sustainable finance, it's good to go to comparison and what is renewable and what is not renewable. So thank you, Guillaume. I'm now giving the floor to Tamas Mejat from the Szeged municipality. Floor is used for a second case study.
Thank you, Philip. Do you see my screen okay?
Everything is fine.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so thank you for inviting me to this prestigious event. My name is Tamas Megyes, and I'm a Chief Operations Officer of the District Heating Company of Szeged. Today I will talk to you about how we are switching the district heating in Szeged to geothermal. First, let me put Szeged on the map for you. Szeged is located in southeast Hungary. It's the administrative center of the South Great Plain region. It's a university town with the second largest higher education institution in Hungary. Szeged has excellent spas, long-established food industry, and on a lighter note, the city is famous for its fish soup, and we have a very good handball team and a very bad football team too. The district heating company of Szeged is one of the biggest in the country. We serve around 27,000 residences, 400 institutions. We have 23 boiler houses with 1 to 20 megawatt boilers, and 240 heating substations, and also around 200 kilometers of subsurface pipelines. So you see where Szeged is, and that's on the right hand corner. That's the layout of the district heating system. Geothermal heat has been present in the heat market of Szeged for almost a decade now. First, two private heating systems sprung up and started providing heat to the single largest heat consumer in the city, the University of Szeged. Then in 2015, the municipality hired us, young at heart professionals, to put the district heating company on a new course. With hydrogeologists and project managers and environmental engineers in our expert pool, we initiated the integration of geothermal into 15 of our 23 heating circuits. So what's behind these developments? What is needed for a municipality to be successful in geothermal projects? First of all, this is our experience. Supply is needed. Obviously, you need geothermal potential. Then demand for a cleaner air, for a more secure energy supply, for less expensive energy is needed. Also a critical mass of gray matter. And last but definitely not least, funding. Szeged has excellent geothermal potential, but there are similar places all over Europe. These red areas highlight the best places for direct use of geothermal energy, but also other places are maybe good too. Here in Hungary and in the southeastern part of Hungary, the thermal aquifer is around 1,800 to 2,000 meters. The geothermal gradient is 150% of the world average. So we have basically wherever you drill a geothermal extraction well, around 2,000 meter depths, you get 90 degrees Celsius water and around 70 cubic meters per hour. So that's good. And also the risks are significantly low. The whole area around Szeged is very well researched by the hydrocarbon industry, and we have already operating geothermal systems in nearby towns and spas. So this is really a geothermal area. The other set of circumstances is that you need to have a sizable heat market, and Szeged and the mid-sized cities tend to have those. So that's basically enough. You rely too much reliance on foreign imported gas means insecure and expensive energy supply, and that's what we have in Hungary. We also have a rundown district heating infrastructure. I mean, most of our or almost all of our equipments are from the 80s, some from the 70s. The pipelines are 40 years old, so this is certainly needs renewing. We have a bad air quality. Szeged has basically no industry. Like I said, we have some food industry, but no heavy industry at all. And on the southeastern part of the country, you see those really dark spots. That's one of them is Szeged. And basically, and I hate to say this, but basically that's because of district heating. We are the single largest air polluter in the city because we burn so much natural gas. And also another circumstance that is worth mentioning is that the natural gas is from the free market. We buy it from the free market, but the end user prices are state controlled. So there's a discrepancy there, and there is a gap there that we would like to shut. And one way of doing that is getting less expensive energy. So what we are doing is we are switching our heating circuits to geothermal. We are carrying out 9 projects. It's 9 extraction and 18 injection wells in the city. So that's I would like to emphasize this. That's 27 wells being drilled in densely populated area, basically in the city, very close to the homes of people. So that requires some careful planning, and also the laying of adjoining pipelines and so on. The drillings are done by a contractor. The DH company, the district heating company, is responsible for making the technical changes to the boiler rooms so that they can be run on geothermal energy. Once ready, the geothermal system will be operated by an independent operator, and set up the district heating company will purchase the energy from this energy supplier company at a set price below the natural gas prices. So it's a good and very clear business arrangement. We buy the energy from them at a lower cost than we would buy natural gas. So that's the business model, and the operator has a 25-year contract with us that we are indeed going to buy the energy from them. So that's the business side of it. Summary of the 9 projects. I'm just going back here for very quickly. This is 9 projects, like I said, but we are supplying 15 heating circuits because they are connected. So summary of the 9 projects. The actual development started in 2019. By that time, we secured EU funding. This is ERDF funding, 50%. And 50% private investment. The private investment is coming from the drilling and operator company. So they are putting in money up front, and then they are getting their share back in 25 years or maybe sooner. The total budget is 63 million euros, so this is quite a large project. The total number of residences affected is 26,000, so that's 97% of all our end users. So even though this is only 15 circuits of the 23 that we are supplying, but those are obviously the 15 biggest. We are saving about 82% on natural gas, over 60% on natural on the volume of natural gas, and our CO2 emission is down by 40% or around 60%. So that's huge. That's really something. And the reason I'm emphasizing these numbers is because, interestingly, like I said before, the end user prices are state controlled. So basically, the heating bills for the people are not going to be any lower. It's not going to be cheaper for them. However, the air is going to be remarkably clearer, and that's the reason why we are doing this whole thing. It's for the environmental benefits. The progress so far and the lessons learned. The progress is the drillings are ongoing. So whenever this COVID situation will ease and it will be possible to visit Szeged, I encourage you to do so. Anybody interested in this project are very welcome. 2 rigs are working in the city 24/7. They go to a site and drill for about 3 to 4 months, basically night and day. 9 wells are completed and 2 are being drilled simultaneously. So there is still around 18 to go. So it's quite a long project still. As you see from the pictures, these drillings are really extremely close to the houses. These are in the neighborhoods. It does cause some tensions. I'm not going to lie about it. The lessons learned are good communications, and having the community embrace the project is vital. We still get complaining emails. I talked about it last week on a panel discussion. Yeah, people complain about the noise and the mess, and they are right. It's noisy, it's smelly, it's dirty, but the air is going to get cleaner, and that's what we can say to them. Joining forces with the municipality and having local companies involved in drilling and the development is essential for the successful project. And also, these huge costs need to be justified, because geothermal projects are expensive. There's no 2 ways around it. However, I like to compare the economics of a geothermal and a fossil fuel-based project, and I usually say that it's not so much the total costs that differ. It's more like the dispersion of the cost, the cash flow throughout the full life cycle of the project. The full costs of a fossil fuel-based project, a fossil fuel-based district heating, is paid for later by the environment, by the next generations. Geothermal projects are paid upfront by whoever implements them, and then they just basically make money and also make the environment better. But geothermal projects are not only expensive, they are complex too. Drilling 2,000-meter deep holes and operating hybrid gas-based and geothermal-based systems simultaneously and together, it's a challenge. So with these difficulties, one might be forgiven that not too many geothermal systems operate at all. But even to my surprise, in Hungary alone, out of the 90 municipalities with district heating, 31 use geothermal as their source. So that's an impressive number, I believe, and it certainly shows that it's not impossible for geothermal to use geothermal for the average town or city. But for that to happen, one has to prepare for a long project development phase. First of all, reservoir assessment is needed, heat market analysis needed, and when these studies conclude that geothermal is indeed an option, then a detailed feasibility study is to be conducted, and quite a few permits need to be obtained to lay out a proper project plan. These upfront expenses cannot be spared. So it is only when the project plan is ready that one can apply for funding. And this means EU money most of the time. And submitting and winning a proposal and application requires further expenses and more money. So you'll also need private investment or bank loan or whatever. Now the money to cover these upfront costs and the expertise to carry out these studies are very rarely available at municipalities. Many times future prospectors, operators bear these upfront expenses in return for their role in later phases of the project. And that's what happens in Szeged. The project I have managed and this particular project have an average payback period of around 12 to 14 years. With a 50% intensity EU funding, you can cut that by half. And you have an investment that pays back in 7 years. Now, unfortunately, that's still more than the 4 years most elected officials, including mayors, like to plan ahead. But jokes aside, a project that cuts energy bills by 80%, CO2 emissions by 60%, and pays back in 7 years is a good offering. It's a true win-win situation for the people and for the municipality and for the private investors. And that's what we see in Szeged happening. So that's what my presentation was about. And as a last slide, I would like to invite you all to Szeged and see it for yourself. I firmly believe that the future is geothermal in Szeged. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your final statement and your great presentation. Indeed, it's a fantastic project that you're doing a real just transition, the fuel switch. And it's now time to start the roundtable discussion. And for that, to first give the floor to Mr. Martin Isaac. The floor is yours to a statement on just transition. And after we'll give the floor to Cathy Trinwell and Olivier Acle.
And first of all, thank you very much for the invitation for this workshop. It's indeed a very important crossroads of issues because for me, geothermal on one hand is a really big opportunity in different sides, in different levels, because it's not only the deep geothermal, you have potential for the very deep, but also you have the shallow geothermal in terms of the heat pumps. And at the same time, the just transition is something that also my country, Slovakia, but not only Slovakia, is really dealing with. And to give you an example, because we are close neighbors and share a lot of history with Hungary, and indeed Halasle is also one of my favorites. So I will accept that invitation for a visit. There is a great example of how we are underusing geothermal in Slovakia, and that is a geothermal source just 20 kilometers east from the capital of Eastern Slovakia, Košice, which has been drilled from the FARE pre-accession funds in 90s. It could heat, it's so powerful that it could heat a third to a half, depending on the energy efficiency improvement, of a town of the Košice town, which is 200,000 to 300,000 people by now. And it's lying idle. While the Košice town is still being heated by coal, imported coal from Russia. And the proposals for, improvements towards the, just transition and improvements towards the climate where let's switch from coal to gas. Yes, there are fewer emissions, but it still is imported gas from Russia if you take aside the fact that it's still a fossil fuel. And on top of it, it's completely ignoring a readily available, renewable source, which would, on top of it, securitize us, provide us with energy independence. So I think this is an example where, first of all, we need to look around for all the readily available unused opportunities that we have. Second, the coal transition regions are, especially those with underground mines, have a great potential for the shallow geothermal. This is where you often don't even have to drill. You already have the underground shafts where you can utilize for installing heat pumps. And there are upcoming projects in Slovakia looking not even on the recent coal mines, but on much older mines for metals to provide heating for the nearby towns. It's something which is energy competitive, which is something which is an opportunity to kind of reuse old mines. And it's something where you have a less of a risk in terms of these stranded investments if you don't hit the right spot because it's already there. And this is a very low-hanging fruit, which I expect to see and hope to see in the just transition planning for the coal mining regions. So this is where it's important to go for it. But it shouldn't be enough because, yes, we're talking a lot about the energy transition from point of view of electricity, but indeed heating is still quite a bit of a challenge. We have a challenge with the sustainable use of biomass or rather, sadly, too often unsustainable use of biomass. And here geothermal can and should be a massive proportion of the answer. And beyond, as I said, the shallow geothermal, we should look into the possibilities of the deep and ultra deep. And I see that two elements. One thing is really funding and supporting the research of an innovation into new drilling techniques and new techniques which would allow us to really drill anywhere and therefore sink the investments, but also have mechanisms in place which would allow the increased use of already now established geothermal drilling technology and the geothermal technologies, like really looking at mechanisms to have to de-risk the investment, so kind of have a risk insurance scheme, ideally on the EU level, because then you have very fragmented market, so to say. And I think this is where we have a strength as a union, is where we act together and have something in common. Not to mention, it's also then the cheaper to run the whole scheme because you don't have to have it in each member state. And I think this is where we could look into also working with the EIB and other institutions rather than really going case by country by country. Second, as a shadow for the taxonomy and looking into how the taxonomy is going to be implemented, really need to kickstart the financing for geothermal and use the taxonomy and the principles that we establish. Gas has a transition goal, but the less, the better. The more we prevent any stranded investments, because again, we're talking about fossil fuel, ultimately not compatible with the carbon neutrality. The less we sink the cost there, the better for us. And what we need to do is look at energy efficiency first, of course, but renewables that can help us to jump straight from coal, but also other fossil materials into renewables. And here, the geothermal in the current possibility is really great for not just actually the district heating systems, but 40% of the heat in Europe used in industrialized processes that's been talked about that needs to be replaced by hydrogen is actually used on below 100 degrees Celsius. this is something where I would say not even very powerful geothermal can easily deal with, and can help us not only with the district heating systems, but there is a massive market for industrial heat that we need. And let's be honest, we need to look closely and how do we do the transformation of European industry in sustainability. And hydrogen has its role, but I don't think using renewable energy to do electrolysis of the water to create hydrogen to heat something below 100 degrees is very efficient in terms of the overall energy balance. So I think we have to really look at closely which source makes sense to heat where, and I see lots of potential for the hydrogen as well. And again, we need to unlock the financing for all these opportunities. And it's not a subsidy scheme. It's about actually making money. This is the crazy thing about it. This is about making money. But to be fair, we also need to end the subsidies for the fossil fuels, because everybody's talking, we need to have subsidies for renewables. Actually, we don't. We just need to end the subsidies for the fossil fuels. And I think this is another very, very important thing linked to specifically the 10E. The 10E is a crucial discussion which we had in the past. I remember still autumn 2019, where we had a big fight in the parliament about the 10E and the projects of common interest list on the 4th list. And I'm really looking forward to see what comes out from the Commission. And I'm expecting that there's going to be very strict criteria about any infrastructure support for fossil fuels, because that's the European level. But then we'll be also pushing for a very clear timelines for phasing out subsidies for fossil fuels on the member state level, while addressing the energy poverty. But the energy poverty to be addressed by new gas boilers at home, it's not sustainable, because the challenge is actually that the people even don't have money to pay for gas. We need to have a complex approach which starts with energy efficiency and then looks at sustainable long-term solutions without the use of fossil fuel within the limits of protecting biodiversity. And here I'm strong believer that the geothermal is going to be one of the key ones for the future of the Europe. And last but not least, I think there is a space for public acceptance. Yes, the pictures, once again, it takes a lot to people be happy with drilling in between the houses, but that's where I think what we need to really look at, it's talk with people, but also start at the places where we don't even need to have to do that. That's the underused potential of, as I said already before, old coal mines, but not only old coal mines, but lots of other abandoned mines, which actually can help even with addressing such an issue as the releases of the methane. One of the big problems, one shadow on the methane file, one of the challenges we have are the methane emissions from the old mines in Poland, back from pre-war times. And maybe a project to deal with it could be not only helping to adjust the emissions, but also use it as a source of shallow geothermal for the heating purposes. So let's look at the synergies and let's look at the opportunities and take down the barriers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Martin, for this statement. And indeed, we see many opportunities for the just transition with what you have just mentioned. So let's see what is the view now of Katie Treadwell from WWF on the just transition. Floor is yours.
Can you hear me? You can hear me? Okay, yes, thank you. Yes, so I think echoing quite a lot of what has just been said. I mean, really, what we're talking about here is a lot of the solutions. What is the right solution for a just transition for people? And the elephant in the room is definitely gas. It's saying, is gas a bridge for getting us out of coal to renewable and going to renewables? I don't think it is. We have the solutions to move to renewables, and with the right upfront investments, we can do that. And I think that's the key. It's about having the right investments straight away. And I think for us at WWF, we've developed principles for what a just transition looks like, and we've been applying those to the territorial just transition plans with a tool online, which I'll be happy to share with anyone who's interested. And one of the first principles of that is that you can't have a just transition if you're not having if you're not addressing the climate crisis. Climate change has the biggest impacts on the poorest and the most vulnerable in our societies because they're least able to reduce their exposure to those impacts. And so we can't consider new fossil fuel investments if we want a just transition, and particularly gas, because methane is so potent. And we need to phase it out by 2035 by the best estimates if we're actually going to address the climate crisis and keep temperatures to below 1.5 degrees. And I think, Martin, you touched on it as well. There is, at the moment, a lot of discussion about including gas in the taxonomy for just transition regions. And that's completely absurd, because not only is it going against the science that gas is not a sustainable solution, we also have to say who is actually benefiting from those gas investments. And what we've seen and what we frequently see in studies is that gas investments will only crowd out renewables, which are actually cheaper in the long run. And if they're built now, then we'll have to burden consumers and those taxpayers in communities with actually paying to get out of those investments. And so I think it's also worth pointing out that we're not just talking about energy poverty when we talk about just transition. That's a really important point to address, but also we're talking about investments that help people. And gas investments don't create very many local or necessarily good jobs. And so I think to pull out some figures, I'm looking at my notes, we have unabated gas power, the IEA recognizes generates around 3.5 construction and manufacturing jobs per million euros invested. Whereas solar, for instance, generates 8.5 to 12. Now, I don't have the figures to hand for geothermal, but the renewables frequently generate many more jobs. And those are also going to be future-proof jobs. And also, I think just transitions have to address social inequalities and then create decent jobs. And that will require planning with communities, planning with trade unions, and also with environmental and social rights organizations to get right. But even better, the investment should also deliver benefits to local communities. And I think this is where renewables like geothermal have a really big potential. And they, especially as compared to gas, for instance, because they offer the ability, they're so decentralized that they can also be combined with things like renewable energy communities, provided that the right frameworks are there. So I think to conclude, gas is not a just transition solution. From our point of view, but also I think from that of communities, it fails on climate and it fails on people. So to include it in the taxonomy on the grounds that it's something that's is needed is absurd. Whereas renewable solutions, we have them at our fingertips, and that can include geothermal, and I think they offer, by their very nature, a much more fairer perspective. And so, yeah, drawing from our principles, I would just say that if you really want to make those the transition just, it needs to be sustainable. It should be planned with the community, and the strategy should be designed with real respect for the partnership principle. So I think I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie, for your statement. And now my pleasure to give the floor to Olivier Rack from ENGIE to give also the view of ENGIE and district heating.
Sure. So good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for having me with you today. I just want to say a few words about the district heating and cooling systems. But first, just to say that lots of efforts have been made in order to green the power generation systems. But we do know that if we want to achieve our target in terms of CO2 emission reduction, we have to tackle as well with the heating, cooling, transportation, but as well industries emission. And this is where, to me, district cooling and heating systems come into play and could play a large and huge role in the decarbonization of Europe. Really, we understood the just transition at the European level as leaving no one behind in the energy transition. It's really about having a kind of an inclusive approach to the energy transition, and we do consider that decentralization is one of the pillars of the vision of the future of the energy sectors. And according to me, DHE networks are a perfect example of how decentralized energy systems could support the integration of renewables in the frame of decarbonizing the energy sector, deliver energy efficiency gains, and boost the local economy, creating jobs that cannot be delocalized, and supporting development of a supply chain based in Europe in the line of the ambition to reindustrialize Europe and ensure strategic autonomy regarding the energy sector. And DHE system could play a huge role, and geothermal energy could play, or should play, and will play a large role in that frame. Geothermal energy is renewable, non-intermittent, local, eco-friendly, which is both efficient and economical for people. It offers considerable and huge potential for heat and power generation. ENGIE sees geothermal solution as an energy with high potential for developing an energy mix that will help to achieve the carbon footprint reduction in Europe. As I believe we saw that with the previous presentation, the potential in Europe regarding geothermal is huge. The heating demand in Europe is huge as well, and geothermal solution could apply for most of the cities in Europe. And we should consider in our urban planning, we should consider the conversion of the district energy systems that are existing right now in Europe. So we do have more than 6,000 systems of that kind in Europe, delivering heat within cities. We should consider the conversion of the system from coal or gas to geothermal in order to help to achieve the carbon footprint reduction in the future. And again, we saw in a map that showed Thomas, I'm sorry, that the potential is huge and almost existing everywhere in Europe. So we should consider converting our system, those systems which exist in Europe, in order to help us to achieve our targets. So my point is that DHE system, local, decentralized, could play and should play a large role in the frame of decarbonizing Europe, and geothermal solution should come first in terms of the merit order of the solution to be applied when the subsurface and local conditions are favorable to geothermal solution. And I'm totally convinced that we could convert lots of our existing system in Europe, and this will help us to achieve our targets.
Thank you, Olivier, for your statement and a great support on geothermal district heating. You know that we are also a great believer on this technology. To come back to the debate of just transition, so we discussed that we have financing needs. Mr. Anvansin started, but we have some tools at European level, the Just Transition Fund, the Motion Fund, and other ones. We mentioned subsidies for fossil fuel that should be ended, and it's part of a fair competition. But for me, one key aspect in the Just Transition will be the carbon pricing, because it will be the challenge of making the carbon pricing, but ensuring a just and affordable energy transition. So what is your view about such a topic? No one wants to start? Martin, Cathy, Olivier?
I can take that one very quickly, but yes, definitely we do think that the 55 package should include a robust and sustained CO2 signal price, maybe beyond the ETS system, the existing ETS system, in order to provide the right signal to operators and consumers in favor of low carbon solution. So we do agree on the fact that we will need a CO2 price in the future. again, how exactly, it's a very complex problem, to be clear with you. And we do believe that we should go beyond the ETS, the existing ETS system.
If I may add a question, actually, because for me this is more interesting to hear the views of others, because it's something which is coming to the parliament, and I prefer to form my views rather than kind of say everything before it's coming this way. Do you think there is a need to have, say, stable price, or to have a minimum price, and kind of let the market see if it can be higher, but it should not be going below certain threshold? And also, what's the take on what's and maybe especially to you, Oliver, but also to Katie and Philip, where do you see the issue of free allowances? Because, as I said, for me, geothermal is also something for the industrial sector, and we really need to kind of push the transformation. At the moment, I don't really see the benefits of free allowance, and especially coming the carbon border adjustment, where I don't see their compatibility with WTO if we have carbon border adjustment. So where do you see the kind of the operating systems, operating space in terms of the ideal outcome? Thank you.
I'm happy to respond on the free allowances. I think absolutely free allowances at the moment are hindering innovation in industry. They are essentially costing the taxpayer. They are removing potential revenues that could be used and reinvested into innovation and into really changing the industries and pushing them forward, which will be the foundation of the jobs in regions in the future. I think what we really need to ask is, yes, I agree that the free allowances are not compatible with the carbon border adjustment mechanism, and that will be something which we'll have to tackle. But I think we really need to say, what are we using the revenues for? And I think that's the key. If you have the allowances all auctioned, you're going to have higher revenues. You can then recycle those into industry and into delivering a just transition. I think that's what's really key for us, is that there needs to be much greater transparency in how revenues are spent and how they're actually being delivered to protect people as well. You have to shield the most vulnerable from the prices, but at the same time you have to maintain that price signal.
Olivier?
Yeah, to me, I would agree on that. To me, the main idea would be to avoid the CO2 price from collapsing, to be clear with you. So to maintain a kind of a threshold, a minimum threshold. Beyond that, it's very complicated to reply to the question. Again, the CO2 price, it's a very complex problem within each of the countries and within Europe. But the main idea would be to go beyond the ETS system for sure, and then to be able to maintain a minimum price for the CO2 ton of CO2 emission.
Thank you.
Yes, indeed. We know that it's a complex system, but we cannot avoid the discussion, because in the heating and cooling sector, we see, and it was mentioned, that a lot of technologies are already affordable. Now, geothermal district heating, we have seen in France, is the most affordable source of heating. And why we have only few systems developed, not enough, it's probably because also the signal is not there also for the fuel switch. We see that we are a bit before 12:30, but we can continue the discussion. So I don't know, Olivier, Katie, or Martin, if you have a last statement to provide to the discussion on just transition. Notably, but what is an objective and mention is also the jobs now, transition in skills, in competence, in jobs. So what is your view also on that?
So if I may, I'm going to start. If I may, what could be, according to me, included in the 55 package in order to enhance, foster the geothermal solution and beyond, the job creation related to those local solutions. I think that energy efficiency should be the first principle above all, to be clear with you. A renovated building stock that is connected to new systems. So we are talking right now about 4th generation of district energy systems. Could help and will help us and consumers to lower their bills. So it's gonna be in favor of the energy poverty that we have to tackle. And we talked about the CO2 price. We could talk as well, I'm sorry, about the renovation wave. It might be interesting to investigate the fact that the renovation wave should go maybe beyond the building stock. Why not include in that idea of renovation wave the renovation of all our systems in Europe? Again, those systems are maybe old, aging from, I don't know, 40 or maybe 30 years, but they should be renovated in order to increase their energy efficiency and to be able to inject more and more renewables. So maybe a good idea would be to benefit from the renovation wave once again. And if I may, and again in the frame of tackle with the energy poverty and create local jobs, I think we should pay attention to what we call the electrification of all the usages. Maybe from time to time, and depending on the location where you are, the potential for different resources is not available, and you should pay attention to maybe to another source of energy, for instance, biomass or geothermal or hydro or whatever. So we should pay attention to maybe a multi-carrier approach for the decarbonization pathway in Europe that will include all types of energy, which could effectively contribute to the carbonization of the energy system. Geothermal solutions maybe being at the top of them, but again, we do not have aquifers everywhere in Europe, so we have to agree on that. So other solutions might exist, and we should consider as well other solutions from time to time. But again, that kind of approach would enable to a true integration of the energy system and the energy sectors, taking into account the diversity of the energy mixes and situation in the member states as well, would be much more cost efficient, according to me. And again, I talked a lot about decentralization of the system, and decentralization to me is totally tied with job creation. So it boots back to the local economy that we could create thanks to those systems.
Thank you, Olivier. Martin or Cathy wants to start first?
I'm happy to just say, I think from our point of view, there can only be a just transition if it's one that diverts climate catastrophe, and it's one where the jobs that will be provided will be future-proof. And that means that we must always have that in mind when we make investments. I completely agree with Olivier that energy efficiency first should be a foremost priority. That one, we know that energy efficiency investments create a lot of jobs, and I think they also are very important in shielding people from energy prices. This is, if you want to have adequate recycling of carbon pricing, then energy efficiency is a central pillar of that. That's kind of the gold standard, if you like, for what you should be investing in, first and foremost. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you. And the concluding remarks, I give it to Martin.
From my point of view, yes, there is. We need to be very careful in terms of what we invest, and it's not, just for the sake of the planet, which I don't want to underplay. This is something which is crucial, but I'm trying to also say that this is also for the sake of the economy, because there is this weird perception that the investments into climate, addressing the climate crisis, both on the mitigation, adaptation, the investments into the nature-based solutions are somehow throwing money out of the window, where actually they are among the most profitable activities that we can do in even purely monetary terms, without calculating in fully the the lives or the services that the ecosystems are providing. And I think to use the example of energy efficiency first, and kind of what we need to look at, and in a bigger systematic view, is yes, it's important to invest at first into energy efficiency, but what it means for us that we kind of don't talk about in Europe is we actually need to look at not only delivering the deep reconstructions of buildings or heat distribution networks, but we need to look at having the people and the skill sets to do that. But also we need to look at the entire supply chain of these things, because these are additional jobs. And if we are doing these supply chains in a way that again is sustainable to the largest possible extent, you don't want to use energy, you don't want to use the insulation on the houses that has to be full of brominated flame retardants, because otherwise you could have a disaster happening. You want to look for sustainable solutions, and you want to be, and Europe should be the place where they are made, where they are invented, and where we take into account all these opportunities. So I think this is where the just transition should not be only about kind of fast, local fix, but looking at, okay, these are the types of these are the opportunities that we have. Let's build what it will need in the second, third line, and what is the entire ecosystem of this change, and how we can build up this ecosystem, not just build it up in Europe, but make it really, really, really world class. And I think this is change what is often forgotten, because suddenly everybody will want to have a heat pump, and there will be none on the market because they'll be sold out. And are we looking at the production capacities, where it's going to be made, how it's going to be made? These are all very relevant questions where I think it's important for not just the policymakers, but also the businesses, NGOs, to try to find a way how to create get the maximum out of it, and prevent any trade-offs. I don't think we can afford trade-offs. We cannot try to save climate and kill biodiversity, or pollute us with toxic chemicals. And I believe we can do all these things if we take care, and if we are really trying to do all that is needed.
Thank you very much, Martin, indeed, for this final conclusion, because indeed we see that we are discussing the 50 or 55%. So we will have targets, security for investment, but we need now to deliver the investment. And for that, we will need for sure, and we know for our sector, some industrial strategy. You mentioned heat pump manufacturing, but for all the supply chain, we need to have a real industry strategy to deliver that on an affordable way, but also with local economic development. So thank you all for your intervention today. Thank the presenters, the panelists. I think it was for me an excellent discussion and exchange. The pity is we still do that in a virtual way. It would have been good also to be that in a physical meeting where we could also chat after the meeting. But we're sure that before end of the year we'll be able to again meet physically, and let's hope stay safe. Thank you all, and hope to see you soon. Goodbye.